someone that I'm training called me an embodiment midwife more than a teacher. I thought that was cute and more true, actually. That like in terms of labels, that's more of what, because embodiment is a process. And he's like, you're birthing buried hurt or fear or anger. You didn't even know you had it, and you need somebody there who's been through it before and who can guide you, who can't do it for you, but who can show you where the little pockets are, the places to go and the places to avoid because it's too safe. It's a bypass. And then to take you through that whole process of, but at a certain point, of course, we stand on our own 2 feet, right? The midwife process is from the beginning until some point when you're clearer and more embodied and you can stand on your own 2 feet, you trust your experience more. You may have more to process, but you don't really need a midwife or someone there to mentor or teach or anything. And in fact, at a certain skill level, you won't be able to find anybody that's more skillful than you. It'll be hard. Especially someone who knows your experience more than you. This is when we become the authority for our own experience. This is what this process is all about. We are being birthed, but our embodied, experience, you could say, is being, it's really beautiful, actually. If you sit with that, and especially if you're going through, because then you know what I'm pointing to. It's really a very rich and process, and I feel honored that people do that with me. It's this stage of my teaching is the most rewarding, for sure. What I'd really like to have been able to do is to have someone to have had someone be an embodiment midwife for me. Because I went through a lot of that process alone, developing this work, and the version of the work that I was doing was a lower skill level than the stuff that you guys are doing now in 3D KI. When I was doing the chronic pain work, a lot of it was 2D, creative 2D, getting into 3D eventually. If you know our terms, that just means we have a special kind of inquiry called 3D rapid fire. If you've never done that, just forget all of that. If you've done it, then you know what I mean. Okay, so if I could have been an embodiment midwife for myself, though, I mean, look, we can soften it all we want, but sometimes an embodiment midwife is sitting there saying, come on and push that through. Don't just sit there. Sometimes labels imply how we interact with each other. And an embodiment midwife sounds, somewhat passively just sitting on the sidelines. And it's true, because you can't do it for people. I can't do it for them. And that you learn that here, maybe more than any other place, because you have to become responsible for your own experience with these tools. But, I have to say there's this, if I were doing it for myself, I would be that midwife in the same way that I am for others. But I would kick my own ass more. And some people will consent to me being much more sort of direct with them. But some people, they don't even realize that they don't want me to be direct. We have to talk about that sometimes, about how they want me to talk to them, because I've learned that if people with trauma, if you talk too directly about, hit the trigger points, or even talk about the trigger points, you can send somebody into a dysregulated state just from talking about stuff, let alone processing it. So it's not like I just go Zen master on everybody directly. Here's where I'll tell you how I'm consistent with everyone, is I'm always direct. I will never hide the ball from you. But how I deliver the ball is different for different people depending on their sensitivity and temperament and capacity to take criticism or feedback, it's like a dance, you know? You can't just walk into somebody who doesn't trust people and feels unsafe around people and start just pointing out how their trauma is being missed. You know, and just, okay, here's the bypass. You're just missing your rage from dad. Write that down. And then there's some buried hurt. And then, of course, terror because you were suffocated once when you were 6. Just, take care of that and rapid fire those and come back in a week and then we'll see how you're doing. No. It's a wholly different process with every single person. When I'm mentoring people, it has to be, and it took me 16 or more years of teaching to get this, and this work had to be out for 7 or 8 years or whatever for me to even know how to train people in this and to be a good guide. And my role on social media is to, provoke a little bit and ruffle feathers and just be myself, basically. I'm not even trying to provoke. But in my mentoring is so different, and it's different with each person. I don't want to talk about all the mentoring styles or anything. I want to talk about something I think everybody can relate to. I just have to figure out what that is. No, it's just the subject is forming as we sit here together. That's why I turned the audio on. And it is I want to do a demonstration for you of how I would talk to my own self. Because I know myself, how would I be a midwife or a teacher for myself going back, let's say, Scott Killaby 2010? To give you some context, my non-dual shift was 2007, so I'd been teaching for 3 years, and 2010 would place us right outside my honeymoon period. So for the first 2 years, it was a lot of bliss and love and byproducts, and I'm done, and there's nobody here. It's all one. But I didn't, it hadn't been embodied yet. About the 3rd year, some of those byproducts dimmed because the repression was coming to the surface and the chronic pain was getting slightly worse. The trauma and the emotional repression in the chronic pain was flaring up, and there my energy was stored in buried anger. So I couldn't have that energetic embodiment at first because of that. It's trauma and repression, which is often the reason that we're not embodied. When we awaken or shift to presence, recognition, can't embody it with trauma and repression. Didn't know that. Specifically didn't know that. But there's your context. And so I'm going to do this imaginary scenario with myself. Again, 2010. I have like 2 or 3 books out already. I don't have a strong spiritual ego like I know it all, 2010, but there's some real stubbornness around a few things that I hope to illuminate here. But how I would talk to myself would be, look, you really shouldn't be teaching. It's too early in the realization. I know that you want to help people. That's coming from, in part, a good place, but you don't know that you have anger repression. So that's always coming from stay safe, get love. Buried emotion is always that. So if you have that and you don't know it, therefore you're teaching in part from trauma. And the people that do follow your work wouldn't necessarily know, because your trauma is that you have to hold anger back and be good and peaceful. And that's what makes you a somewhat popular teacher, because you're not threatening. But that's because you're in anger repression, Scott. That isn't to do with the clarity. You're too good. You're not going to do anything bad, and that's because you're still in trauma. You have anger repression, and when you're teaching from it, and you're pointing to other people who have that, and they don't know it either. So you're pointing and staying above the root of repression, the root of suffering. You're literally leading people in a bypass. You need to stop and do your own processing. And really, you shouldn't even be teaching, frankly, because you're misleading people. That's what you teachers do when you first awaken. You think you know it all, or you've got it all. And then you blindly mislead people. into thinking that that's it. You shift to awareness and you're done. And if you don't share the rest of your process, that's exactly what you'll do, Scott. You'll mislead people into thinking that they're done because you're thinking that you are. You're not. And I'd probably say that to any teacher if they could hear it that's like 2 or 3 years outside of their realization, because it's just too early. It's fine that you teach. Nobody's going to slap you on the wrist for it. But just wait, because things change. So would I get through to Scott 2010? Probably not right away. He would have held on to, well, there are a couple of things. If I would have gotten angry at 2010, Scott, he would have used my anger and said, well, you're just triggered. And so I don't know how clear you are if you're angry. And that's anger repression talking. And as an anger repressor, I would have used that weaponry at any non-reactivity, or excuse me, at any what perceived as reactivity from me, the 2024 teacher, because Scott couldn't hear anger. He was afraid of anger. So if I would have gotten angry, that would have been telling. If I would say, you're totally fucking bypassing, you should stop teaching, you're a fraud. If I would have gotten angry at him, that would have been something that he could use, is what I'm saying. You're being reactive. See? That's what anger repression does. Or can we just talk? There's no reason to bring anger to it. See? And then I would say, that's your problem right there. Because there's no reason for you to bring anger to it because you're frightened of it. It has nothing to do with clarity or enlightenment or anybody else. It's all you. And so it's time to process that and shut up and stop trying to defend the fact that you still have trauma. Just get busy and take a look. And then, I'd probably been triggered. But the trigger, the 2010 Scott trigger would have been self-protective, see? Because if you would have gotten triggered is different than anger. If I could feel and express anger, that doesn't mean I'm triggered. That's what people don't understand. Because some anger, you just raise the volume. It's the only way people will hear you. But when you can't, it just feels like anger itself is a problem. Like if you can't use anger at all in any kind of healthy situation, if you've never expressed it in a way where you see it as helpful or it's part of your authentic self, then it's going to trigger you. And then if you're an anger repressor, the trigger is going into like a deficiency story. And so the 2010 Scott might have been triggered into some sort of deficiency story, but that would have protected him from the buried anger while I got angry at him. See? And he would just go back into some trauma response of trying to be vulnerable, faking that because he has anger repression, just being quiet, calling out my reactivity. This is all the weaponry of repression. Be more vulnerable, quiet down. There's no reason for that. All that is all the weaponry of repression to try to ward off something. I'm telling you, I used to live that way and I know all the weaponry. And if the 2010 Scott would sit there and try to deflect into the non-dual, I'd be on every single one of those deflections. Like, if he would say, it's all just about presence, I'd say, bullshit, you have buried anger. That's what's producing your suffering. It's not, of course it's all presence. So is the buried anger. Get to work. Transmute the buried anger. There's nothing that you could say, 2010 Scott, to get out of this. Because it's all your mind trying to avoid real freedom. So if he said, well, all we need to do is I need to continue looking at this or that or that way. Nope. It's buried anger producing all of that. You're wasting your time and staying safe. If he said, well, I should do more shadow work. Yep, you can do shadow work, but if you use that to avoid your buried anger, that's just part of the bypass. Because those shadows are connected to buried anger. If he said, well, I'm going to go and start looking at identity more deeply, I want to say that's you staying safe because those identities are coming from the anger repression. They are there to keep you safe from the buried stuff. There's nothing that you can say. Because I'm your older self. I'm the more embodied self. I know all that. You can try, but I know better. And nobody wants to be put in that position, right? I mean, that's it. Nobody wants to be in that kind of hot seat, really. Most people don't. But it's a really loving thing, but you just can't, we talk to everybody differently. Everybody's different. I mean, even if the 2010s got triggered, he can't hear me. So I might change my approach once he's triggered. I might get angrier to make a point, or I might just talk to him about that trigger and say, what are you believing right now about all this and about yourself? And look, you don't even know how to go to the buried anger under that trigger. I'd point it out to him. I would talk to him about it all, if he could handle it. I mean, I could tell him everything. I'd say, you know how you're shutting down right now? That's you protecting yourself. You can do that. Go ahead and do that. It's what you've done all your life. Just sit there quietly, acting like you're present or that you've got it covered or something. It's all a front. You don't. You've buried anger. You're hiding. You know, people say, well, you'll never do that to yourself. If I love myself enough, and if I could, I would. If I could bring my old self back, but yeah. But would I talk to everyone like that? No, because it isn't skillful with everyone. Some people, when you sit down with them and you point out one part of their bypass, it's threatening. Just one thing. And they have every right to feel threatened just on that one thing. But you just can't go further with them then. Because if they become defensive around that one thing, they can easily project it back to you, shadow it back to you, transfer the trauma back to you. In other words, just get triggered and make it about you, me. And so we're just this interesting territory I live in, you know, and train people in. It's a dance in every way. And I'll tell you this, and if you can't feel my heart, then you can't feel your heart on this. I started teaching, in a sense, to stay disconnected from my anger and therefore other people. But in the embodiment, I'm ready to connect with you all. I'm ready. It might scare you, but I'm here. I'm here. And I can hold it. Whatever it is, I can be here with you. But what I really want to do is show you how you can hold it, whatever it is. You can let it come up. You can bring it up. You don't have to stay repressed. The actual relationships that I have are always direct. You know, that's one thing you'll know if you work with me. I'm always going to be honest and direct with you. But I realize that I'm working with people who are traumatized and have emotional repression, and trust is a really big issue. It really is. Feeling like you can, you know, people have told me things that they've never told any other soul. Things that they could never tell other people. Because for some reason they perceive that I'll be okay hearing that, and I am. Because I think I've heard it all at this point. It feels like from the psychopathy to the serial killer to the victim of serial killers to rapists, those who've been raped, those who've molested, those who've been molested, those who've been beaten, those who have beaten others, murdered. Everything you can imagine that's been done to a child, I've heard in my 16 years, I think, or almost everything. And when you live in that world, you either got to tune in. I had to tune in my own body fully, or I had to get out of this whole thing, this gig of awakening. Because you can't be with people like that and not do your own work. It doesn't work. Otherwise, you carry too much. You're not clear. We're not clear. It feels like we've only tapped the surface on the awakening thing. To me, too many people are just too interested in being done. And so basically people just selling themselves short at every corner that I can see. Trying to be done, trying to just, to get love and stay safe. I get it. And I did it. Awakening experience. Okay, I'm a teacher. Now I can help others. I guess that maybe the way that I'm paying back or the way that I'm giving back around that is to be patiently sitting with people who, and being a midwife for people who really want to awaken, who really want to be here. Not people who are trying to have an experience or a shift so they can be done with life or living or relationship, but so that they can begin. Really. It's not that we're afraid of death, we're afraid to begin living. And this work gives you that beginning, because with repression, there's always some fear of being yourself. And when there's a fear of being yourself, you can't really be free, can you? We can pretend. And we can even pretend that all you have to do is see there is no self. We can pretend, but you're still going to suffer. Because I sat with people for years looking for that. There's no self findable in experience. If you're skillful, you'll never find a self. There's only the phenomena coming and going. But knowing that there's no self in any of the phenomena itself, unless it's embodied, is not going to bring the transformation. Because you can sit there and have a seeing of no self, or that I'm the awareness, and it's all that. And then as soon as your wife comes in, it reminds you of your mother, and you have buried hurt with her, and then therefore some trigger comes up, you don't even know where it came from. When we talk about being conscious, if you don't know exactly where your triggers are coming from, how conscious are you? I think that's what I mean by selling ourselves short. Like, we talk about triggers as if they just come out of nowhere, or ego as if it just comes out of awareness spontaneously for no reason. And nothing is like that. Everything happens for a reason. We are believing the things that we're believing to stay safe and get love and survive. That's why we believe them. That's why we hold back emotions, so we can stay safe and get love. Everything that's arising has good reasons behind it. And so that we need to understand that if we're going to get free. So what are the reasons? What are the utilities? To stay safe and get love, basically. It's fear. A lot of it. And that conditioning that resides deep in the body is no interest in freedom or healing or awakening or anything like that. It's just stay safe, get love. And that's running everything. And if you don't know that, everything you're doing is surfacey. Because you can question an identity and then the identity falls away. But underneath that is programming that will produce it again, because the programming is stay safe, get love. And that identity helps you stay safe and get love. So you want to go to where the programming is, I must stay safe and get love. There's the buried stuff. Deep in the body, hidden, not arising to awareness, basically. And that's the problem, it's not arising. I mean, that's what makes it a bypass. When you're in a practice that says just be with what arises, if something doesn't arise, you can't be with it. You can't make it conscious. So we just learn to prompt it up, and skillfully keep prompting it up and watching that energy of repression transmute. And I want to say to people, that's your physical sense of separation. Think about it. If you're afraid to feel and express certain emotions, that fear concretizes over time. It becomes your hardened physical body, that self-contraction, and gives you that sense of physical separation. And in that is a sense of deficiency or lack, because you're lacking those buried emotions. You're deficient in those. Those are buried. So it gives you that sense of separation and deficiency. And that's all the emotional repression and trauma doing that. But if we put it in spiritual terms, we just totally bamboozle ourselves. If we say, well, anything else, we're not aware of that, how that works. We may be even turning away from it in some ways, trying to turn away from it. That's how repression is. Our conditioning just wants to constantly turn away from what's buried to protect us. But when we talk about being awake, we must be awake to the mechanism of this. We must be awake to the mechanism that says I have to seek. Because that conditioning comes from the buried emotions. If I can seek, I can turn away from the buried emotions or in the moment in my body. It's an escape, right? It gives me safety to think that there's a future also in which when I get to that place, I won't have to feel this stuff that's buried in my body. But all of that is unconscious. And so instead we seek, and then on the conscious level we tell ourselves that we're seeking awakening or healing. But at the unconscious level, it's just, I'm seeking to avoid, because I don't want to feel what I buried. It's not safe, and I won't. That's the unconscious. When we become finders, we have to be really careful with that. That's what I've learned. Like, we're seeking, and then we have a shift in perception. And usually it's it's the presence shift that makes people sort of become and present themselves as finders, whether they're teachers or not. And part of it is the shift itself that makes people, because it's a shift in perception. Like, you really see that you're not the story. So it's an authentic shift, but not complete. It's just like an initial kind of head awakening mostly, unless there's been a heart opening or some other embodiment with it. There's still this body that keeps the score, even if there's a recognition that essentially what is arising comes and goes to the awareness. We still have the problem that certain things are not arising. They're buried when we first awaken usually. And so Adya talks about head, heart, gut, but I would say it's bigger than that. It's the whole body. You could have a bad ankle because of rage for dad. You could have a bad back. You could have testicular cancer because of unmet hurt or fear of anger or whatever. I mean, with the science now that tells us it's bigger than head, heart, gut, although there's a lot there, head, heart, gut. The reason that head, heart, gut is a problem is because I had chronic pain and spinal stenosis and cancer that had an emotional root. And by thinking head, heart, gut, I stayed safe from the repression. See, we can use easily use spiritual frameworks to literally hide something from ourselves. Even really mature, profound spiritual frameworks. Because head, heart, and gut is tattooed on my arm. I still respect Adya for that, but the thing is it's just not complete enough, because it's bigger than that. It's our whole body is a reservoir, potentially, of trauma, until it isn't. I mean, it's not that there's trauma everywhere, but can't limit it to head, heart, and gut. The throat alone contains so much conditioning and emotional congestion for people, or pelvic area around sexuality, creativity, and a number of other things. Of course, all the chakras, those are areas that contain density of emotion, repression, trauma, but all up and down the spine. Listen to the teachers who have back problems and spinal problems. That is not a coincidence. Some Kundalini did not cycle through completely. But whether we're aware of that as being part of the spiritual process is a whole other thing, because we have just really elaborate ways of hiding this from ourselves. If you guys have seen this, hiding trauma. Flashbacks themselves are a way that we hide it. It's just a farce. A flashback is just a glimpse of something, usually without any emotion sometimes, and it's packed full of repressed emotion, for example. See, our systems are totally designed to protect us from the pain of the past. And that's the repression. And you can just let sleeping dogs lie. But then you run the risk of the bypass, and that's how I got sick, is letting sleeping dogs lie. Letting trauma from the past go uninvestigated in an awakening process. Big risk, I think. No, it's bigger than a risk. It's a miss, a huge miss to me. And trauma is not just being locked in a closet, you know. Trauma is like you had a dad, when you came home from work, you listened for the footsteps because you didn't know if he was angry or not. Stuff like that. Or mom was just never present. She was always there, but she's always cleaning. And I couldn't connect with her. Like, that's trauma, you know. Or you're eating and you're crying and mom says, "Stop crying, here's an ice cream." That's trauma, because you were crying and she gave you something that just stopped those emotions. And then you learn, don't cry. Go eat food. Go eat sweets, for example. Almost everything that ails us as adults has some root in our trauma, in our childhood programming. But whether you know that, it has more to do with how awake you are in your body, really, than it does how much you know about science. Although if you go read the science, it'll tell you that it's not the same as knowing it directly in your body and seeing the programming that runs everything. It's just almost everything I've seen in the spiritual world, in the end, like the landings, like post-awakening, are all trauma. The scandals, the disease, the chronic pain, it's just all trauma. It's the cults, but it's also the people against the cults. You know, it's the narcissist teachers and the ones that are fighting them. It's the gurus, but also the people that worship them. It's just trauma binding all across the board. The place that I've had to be really careful with is teaching people to stand on their own 2 feet, because where that came from is seeing that basically if you don't, you're living from the conditioning of human, like being ego conditioning. You have to stand on your own 2 feet and allow everything that you have never allowed before, so that your ego structure is made toast out of that, because your ego structure is there to keep you safe from feeling that. And so we can never claim freedom without going all the way, I don't think. And we don't need to. That's the whole problem. Everybody's trying to be done. We don't need to claim it. So what is it that makes us want to claim it? It's the trauma. The best illustration that I think I can give of this whole thing about wanting to be done on a path is through this way, which you've heard me say before. I'll just keep repeating it so you can think of it this way. If we live on a conscious earth, parents would just help children know what they are from very early, the awareness that they are, and they would help them feel and allow all emotions, because that's what would make a conscious earth, that there are conscious beings who don't have trauma. They're just present, aware, embodied from the beginning. It's an earth that doesn't exist, but we can use it as a scenario to point out that child then would not fall prey to a lot of the things that we fall prey to on a spiritual path. For example, that child's not going to make a big deal out of the recognition of the presence at the foundation of their experience, other than that's what I am. But it's not like, you can't make that into an ego as a child. You can't go to school and say, "Well, I'm the awareness. Are you?" And the child says, "Yeah, I am too." "Oh, we both are? Okay. I can't really use that." See, it doesn't work. When you actually understand what we're doing in awakening, we're actually just discovering what we are, what we missed through the child development. And so the other thing is, we would have to deal, and we do have to deal with emotions. Just like the child who wakes up or knows what they are, they don't wake up. They just know that they're awareness, and the parents help them feel and allow it all. That's exactly what we have to do. Otherwise, we're not conscious beings. But the difference is that we come as unconscious adults with buried emotion, and then we create a path. We think it's a spiritual path. And so therefore, we think there's an end to it because it's a path. But now go back to the scenario of the kids. So is that kid going to say, Mom and Dad, when is the end of this path of feeling and allowing everything? I'm sorry, son? What did you say? What? Mom, Dad, when is the end of the path? When am I done feeling and allowing everything? Oh, hon, you don't understand. It's just about being present. It's not about being done. You're just here and you allow it all. But Mom and Dad, when is the end of the path? You see, this is a fucking irrational conversation that would never happen. Like I'm just illustrating it. So when we say the end of the path, it's a creation of our mind that we think we're on a path. We are conscious, awake, sentient beings who have emotions. Our job is to allow them every moment and not look for an end. The end is the repression that doesn't want to feel those emotions. Those children don't have the repression, see? So they're not speaking from repression. They're not saying, when's the end of the path? When do I don't have to feel this anymore? That's repression, see? Now, can we come back to being adults here? What are we doing? Let's take a look at it. We want to get what we missed. So definitely the awareness recognition is important, just like with a child. But we're different here because we come with buried emotions. So if we rush to the attainment of the awareness recognition as if we don't have buried emotions, we can have a problem on our hands. Because now we're not conscious beings. We just have this recognition of a witnessing presence and then a bunch of buried emotions. See that? And now, but then we think we're done, like the child, as if the child would be done when they recognize the presence. Well, no, the child's not done living. Emotions come and go. The child allows them and experiences life and all that. Well, that's what we want to do here. We want to experience life and let all the emotions come and go, but we can't because we've already buried some. Do you see how this changes everything? The whole scenarios are now different. We can't do it like the child. We can't just wake up and then allow everything because we started with buried stuff, unlike that child in the scenario. So what do is that we not only want to recognize the presence, we want to deal with the buried stuff from the beginning. And then come to find out the buried stuff is what's producing our suffering. So by dealing with the buried stuff from the beginning, we're getting to the root of the suffering too. Not just the recognition of presence, but to the suffering root. And I think that's what we want, because we want to be like the child. When that child turns 18, they're not going to be sitting there attached to mom and dad. You're not going to be sitting here attached to me as the teacher. When you become embodied and authentic, you're going to be letting go of all this. You're going to go out in the world and play. That's what this work is about, is living. And you're going to have us here just as long as you need us, just like parents sort of. But the whole point of this relationship is to let you be free. And if you can't be free, then this is not a good methodology. In the end, if you can't be free of this, there's something wrong with this. That's how I see it. So my job is to help free people from it as much as use it. Because that conscious child is not going to stay with the mom and dad attached. That's the trauma. So if I see that, I'm going to wonder why you're doing that, I'm going to wonder what's going on, and I want to help you with that. To me, that's real love, But the other thing is, for myself, I have to make sure this is healthy for me. I'll just leave you with this. This whole teaching midwife thing has to be healthy for me, or I don't want to do it. And that's something I could say only after doing trauma work. If I have to do this in a way that doesn't work for me, I won't do it. Or I'll demand to do it differently, because that means boundaries that I have to be able to set. And that's up to me to do, no one else. I have to make sure that I'm feeling and expressing what's true for me, even as a midwife or a trainer, because The midwife process is about being an authentic self. So if I'm going to sit here and pretend, then I'm not really helping you through the process. I'm just staying safe to get your love and maybe people pleasing you. And that cannot happen really as a teacher at all. It cannot. So that I have to be clear, and I have to do my own work as a midwife or a teacher, or it doesn't work. I can't be done. I can, but I can't use that to hide from my own emotions and still be earnest. See that? And that's the call that I'm putting out there for anybody who's ready. Where are the teachers that no longer claim to be done, that aren't coming from trauma, that are actually understand that the child in the conscious world would never be looking for done. There's no end of a path. So the teachers who are saying they're done, as far as I'm concerned, are coming from trauma, even if they're implicitly saying it, because in the conscious world, nobody's done. We just live awake and experiencing. And all we can do is help each other to discover that. That's it. Thank you for listening.